They say the New Mexico desert hides secrets better than any graveyard. In the small town of Elephant Butte, heat shimmers off the sand like smoke, and wind drags across the empty highway, carrying whispers that sound almost human. On a spring morning in 1999, a truck driver spotted a woman running out of that wasteland, barefoot, chained, and terrified. What she said when she reached him would open a door to one of the darkest places in American history. A place the FBI would come to call the Toy Box. David Parker Ray was the kind of man who disappeared in plain sight. 59 years old, with a graying mustache and calm desert drawl, he worked as a park ranger at Elephant Butte Lake. Locals described him as polite, quiet, even helpful. He spent his free time restoring old cars and tinkering in the massive trailer he kept behind a chain-link fence. No one ever asked what he was building in there. Maybe they didn't want to know. The woman who escaped, Cynthia Vigil, had been missing for days. When police questioned her, she could barely speak. She told them about waking up in that trailer, about cold metal walls lined with tools that weren't meant for fixing engines. She talked about a tape recorder that played a man's voice describing what was about to happen, in a tone so casual it made her blood run cold. That voice, investigators would learn, belonged to David Parker Ray himself. When officers reached his property, they expected a crime scene. They found something worse, something that looked like a surgical theater built by madness. Chains bolted to the ceiling, cameras, detailed drawings pinned to the walls, and in the center, a gynecological table under bright industrial lights. Every inch of the trailer told the same story: deliberate, organized cruelty. Ray had even installed a mirror on the ceiling. It wasn't improvisation, it was design. In a small lockbox, police discovered the tape Cynthia mentioned. On it, Ray's voice greeted his victims like an instructor at a seminar. He described step by step how they would be restrained, what rules they were to follow, and what would happen if they didn't. His tone was flat, almost bored, as if he'd done this many times before. Investigators later said the recording sounded rehearsed, perfectly calm, perfectly horrifying. When they opened his diary, the picture grew darker. Page after page, Ray had listed dates and cryptic initials stretching back decades. Some entries mentioned women he'd taken. Others used shorthand no one could decode. Authorities feared the list wasn't fiction. They began searching the desert around Elephant Butte for bodies. They never found a single one. What they did find were photographs, hundreds of them, showing women bound and terrified. Some looked recent, others decades old. In one picture, the background matched a stretch of desert road miles from Ray's property. In another, a victim wore a piece of jewelry that her family later identified. The FBI now believed they were dealing with a serial predator who'd been active for at least 40 years. Neighbors were stunned. They'd seen Ray fixing boats, chatting with locals at the diner, laughing with his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy. No one imagined she was his accomplice. When questioned, Hendy admitted she'd helped lure women to the trailer. She claimed Ray had done this long before she met him, that she'd been too afraid to stop him. Her testimony painted a chilling portrait. Ray treated his crimes like a craft, improving his methods over time, adjusting small details to avoid mistakes. Investigators combed through his property for weeks. They found a white cargo trailer outfitted with pulleys, chains, and what looked like makeshift medical instruments. They found sketches and written fantasies describing training victims to obey commands. And they found a map with certain areas of the desert marked in red ink. Search teams dug every location. Nothing. It was as if he had erased his victims from the earth. Psychologists later called Ray a process killer, someone who took satisfaction not from the end result but from control itself. He didn't kill for rage or revenge. He killed to choreograph fear. Even the recordings were part of that control. He wanted his victims to hear what was coming, to live inside their own dread. Detectives said it was like he'd built a movie where he played God. Public reaction was instant and furious. Headlines called him the Toy Box Killer, though police could never prove how many people he'd actually murdered. Cynthia Vigil's escape was the only reason any of it came to light. She'd waited for Ray to leave the trailer, then convinced Hendy to let her loosen one wrist cuff. When Hendy looked away, Cynthia struck her with a lamp, ran out half-naked, and didn't stop until she found that truck driver. Her testimony saved countless potential victims, but it also revealed how close Ray had come to perfecting invisibility. During interrogation, Ray showed no remorse. He insisted everything had been consensual. Investigators showed him the photographs, the tape, the equipment. He shrugged. Even in court, when prosecutors played parts of his recorded instructions, Ray's face stayed blank, eyes scanning the room like he was bored. People in the gallery said it felt like watching evil study its own reflection. The trial dragged on for years. Hendy took a plea deal for assisting in kidnappings. Ray faced multiple charges of abduction and assault, but without physical remains, prosecutors couldn't attach murder to his name. Cynthia and 2 other women testified, their accounts eerily similar. The drugs, the restraints, the cold voice of that tape. Jurors later said the evidence felt overwhelming yet surreal, like a nightmare that somehow fit inside the rules of law. In 2001, before sentencing, David Parker Ray collapsed from a heart attack in his jail cell. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. For investigators, it was a bitter ending. They still had no answers, no bodies, no closure for the families who suspected their daughters might be on those missing person lists. After Ray's death, the FBI released parts of the recording publicly, hoping someone would recognize the voice or the background noises and link them to unsolved disappearances. Calls poured in from across the country. Parents who'd lost daughters in the 1980s described seeing familiar faces in those recovered photographs. A woman in Arizona swore she'd met Ray once at a gas station, that he'd offered her a job cleaning his trailer. She'd said no. That simple no may have saved her life. To this day, law enforcement believes Ray may have killed as many as 60 women. Others think the number is far higher, pointing to the dates in his diary and missing person cases stretching back to the 1950s. Some even believe he had help beyond Hendy, friends or family who knew pieces of the truth but stayed silent. Ray's own daughter, Jessie, was accused of assisting in earlier abductions but later cooperated with police. Her testimony hinted that her father's darkness wasn't sudden. It had been growing for years. The desert around Elephant Butte never gave up its dead. Locals say the sand shifts too easily. By morning, footprints vanish, and anything buried becomes part of the landscape. Detectives sometimes return on anniversaries, scanning the horizon, listening for clues in the wind. They say it's the quiet that haunts them most. The same quiet that once hung over Ray's trailer before the sirens came. When journalists visited the site years later, they found the trailer gone, dismantled and stored as evidence. All that remained were faint tire tracks and the frame of a metal fence. But some residents swear that at night, when the air cools and the desert hums, they can still hear a low mechanical whirring, the sound of generators that once powered Ray's private world of control. People have argued for decades about how many monsters like him exist, hiding behind ordinary faces, building their own versions of the toy box. Psychologists use his case to study how someone can separate humanity from curiosity, how he could clock in for work each morning and then return home to unimaginable obsession. One profiler said Ray treated people the way a scientist treats an experiment, endlessly adjusting variables to see how long fear could last. That maybe is the most terrifying part. It wasn't rage that drove him. It was fascination. After his death, the FBI burned thousands of hours cataloging evidence. Every photograph, every page of notes, every object recovered from that trailer is still archived in Albuquerque. Agents say the case changed how they train for abduction investigations. It forced them to think about evil not as chaos, but as routine. David Parker Ray woke up every day and went to work on horror like it was maintenance. And yet, despite all that evidence, so many mysteries remain. Where did the bodies go? How many were there? Did anyone else help him clean the scenes? Or did the desert itself do the work? Even now, 20+ years later, new missing person cases in New Mexico occasionally get compared to his timeline. The connection is usually ruled out, but not always quickly. The last officer to interview Ray said that as the prisoner was led away, he smiled slightly and whispered something under his breath. The words were too soft to hear, but the guard who stood closest claimed he caught the last part. "You'll never find them," and they never did. If you ever drive through Elephant Butte at night, you'll notice how empty it feels. The road cuts straight through a sea of black sand. No streetlights, just the pale glow of your own headlights. Somewhere out there was the trailer where a quiet man built his secret world. It's gone now, but people say the desert remembers. Sometimes hikers find old chains half buried in the dirt. Sometimes they hear distant voices when the wind picks up. And every so often, a tourist snaps a photo that shows a pale figure standing just beyond the beam of their flashlight, watching. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the story of David Parker Ray reminds us that monsters don't live under beds. They rent trailers, fix boats, and wave to their neighbors. They hide behind the heat haze of a lonely highway until one of their victims runs far enough to break the spell. And if you've stayed with me to the end of this story, remember there are thousands more like it still unsolved. So before you scroll away, make sure you subscribe. Because next time, the story might not be about someone in a distant desert. It might be about the place you drive past every night.